This is Living Between Worlds for April 17th, 2024. We're in the 5th year of these calls, begun in the early days of the COVID pandemic, as I was struck by the remarkable parallels of the pandemic and the climate crisis. And we talked about that many times in early calls. The frame and the name comes from the inspired by the Antonio Gramsci quote, Italian revolutionary of 100 or so years ago, who said that the old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. And between those is the time of monsters. And I think of monsters not as like Smaug in Lord of the Rings, but as the unleashed primal forces bubbling below the surface, taking us Lord knows where. We're in a liminal time. We're in a time that's going to be looked back on some 100 years from now and be given a historic name. And here we are in the middle of it. And this is what it feels like when history is happening. How do we move? What do we do? So we've covered many themes in these years. There's archives on YouTube. We'll post the link in the chat a little bit later. But let me, for right now, introduce to you our special guest, Bill Reed. Bill is a friend of, probably 3 decades, Bill, colleague of almost that long, former partner at Natural Logic. We've worked together on client projects ranging from industrial transformation to built environment. Bill is an architect, one of the founders of the lead green building rating system that many of you are familiar with. But I don't know how you describe it, Bill. I think of you as a lapsed architect. It's not so much you're doing architecture anymore, but recovering architect. Well, hope so. And turn your mic up a little bit, please. Doing a lot of remarkable work with communities on both what appears to be design and development and real estate development processes, but is actually a remarkable approach about how to bring people together even when they are in profound conflict. And as you can hear, that's not just a matter of real estate development, that's a question for our times. We've talked about that many times before. So Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Gil.
What do you got to say?
Great to be here. It's great to see so many friends on the screen. A lot of you know what I talk about anyway, so you can leave. We'll have the others who haven't heard me before. I don't know, Gil, do you want me to just dive in, or do you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could dive right in, or I could ask you about this strange title that we have on this call.
Let's do that. Ask me about that strange title.
Sure. So in our prep conversation last week, Bill talked about a process for healing the world in 18 months. And that's an outrageous thing to say. And I imagine that it has to do not with snap your fingers and the planet is transformed, but generating a healing process that produces remarkable results in a really short period of time. So tell us, Bill, what you mean by that, and then take us as far into the story as you want to go.
Okay, thanks. Well, it's admittedly a teaser, but it's not a false teaser. I want to assure you of that. It comes from real experience. And what we observed as we were working on permaculture projects and ecosystem restoration projects is that within 18 months, when you work with nature on her own terms, self-organization and resiliency or diversity of species begins to be immediately, well, within 18 months, it becomes apparent. And we observed that over and over again. So that's a pretty hopeful thing. But what was really interesting is when we asked our clients the benefits of working this way in community and in larger urban areas, it is consistent. It's eerily consistent, where people said, well, we saved about 18 months on our land use approval. We got our community support within 18 months. We got our financing within 18 months. And a Jewish friend of mine said, well, Bill, you know what that is in Hebrew? Well, I didn't. And 18 is chai, which means life. So I don't know, put that in your pipe and smoke it and see what happens. But it's evocative anyway. So
it is. And it raises a question for me. I mean, human processes might be fairly similar across wide regions, political jurisdictions, and so forth. But ecological processes, hard for me to imagine that if you're working in a desert environment or a northern or boreal forest environment, that you're still going to see the same time pacing. Do you?
Yes, you do. You see recovery. Now recovery, what does recovery mean? as you alluded to, it doesn't mean that we're all of a sudden everything is hunky-dory and we're made well. We just see self-organizing happening, that there's new relationships building. And I think we have to explore the definition of what we mean by sustainability too. What are we talking about with sustainability? And I would say that what we're talking about with sustainability is sustaining life, living process, life's processes. And what's the indicator of health?
That's different than ESG, man.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I'm being overly simplistic, although I have tested this with various ecologists, that the simple answer about sustainability is that life self-organizes for greater diversity and complexity, which allows for a dynamic stability. And what we're facing on the planet right now is instability due to the monocultures. Well, I don't know if it's due to it, but certainly as an indirect result of the monocultures we're producing, so that we're creating a devolving situation. But life is this mysterious force that, like as Robert Pirsig said, life runs up. It as opposed to the entropic second law of thermodynamic forces that face everything else that we do in the technical and infrastructure world. So
I learned why that is from Karl-Henrik Robert, the founder of the Natural Step, from Sweden. And he didn't actually teach it, but it sort of distilled out of the conversations over many, many months that the reason life runs up on Earth is that we have an off-planet source of energy.
That's right. It's the sun. Without the sun,
93 million miles away, we harvest the energy here. If we were driving the planet with on-planet energy, we'd be in the midst of the entropic process of those energy sources. You have to isolate the source outside the system, and that's why it works here.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. You have to make the exception. We have the sun. Without that, none of this works.
We have the sun, and we have photosynthetic energy harvesters.
That's right.
And the moon, don't forget the moon, sun, earth, moon system is all, without the moon, it's a very different world.
It's a different world, but it's a different part of the process. The anti-entropic story is sun plants.
Yep.
So look at all of us. We are solar-powered, water-cooled organisms.
The whole point of that is that if we align ourselves with nature's processes, we can have a healed earth very quickly. So what's stopping us is the question.
So
and
Bill, what's stopping us?
Huh?
So Bill, what's stopping us?
Well, I'll answer that question then. And so what's stopping us is lack of will. I think that's pretty much it. We divert our attention from, we think we talk about dematerialization. How many of us are really willing to dematerialize as one of the major forces out there, major issues facing us in terms of our use of resources? But I think that we are, what's stopping us is that we think that we are in charge, for one thing. I think that we think that we can fix things without having to sacrifice or without having to change the way we live. And all of that comes down to a combination of understanding how life works and the will to want to understand it. So that's a foundational premise for regenerative work, is that we need to build will in populations. And we have, based on, not based on Elinor Ostrom's work, but because Elinor Ostrom actually really supported the premise, is that we can't save the planet. It's too big. It's too abstract. There's no CEO in charge. But what Elinor Ostrom proved is that we can save our places. And because we can see the ramifications of our decision making, and we can actually enroll and inspire people in place to begin to think differently. And so the premise that I hold in our work is that we can't save the planet, but we can save the planet place by place.
And I would imagine that doing that you need people's will to do that, but I would imagine that process builds people's will as a reciprocal life going up, right?
That's right. And so how do we actually, I like to say that our work is about helping people fall in love with life again.
Nice.
And I think it's obvious, love is a heck of a lot better motivator than fear or checklists. We always hear this concept of And by the way, I'm being really practical and pragmatic. This is not just wishy-washy thinking. I hope to be able to present how this works. Because there is a process of inviting people into relationship, not only with each other, but with the living systems that support us. And it's not very complicated, it's not hard, but it does require perseverance and it does require will on our part. And equally important to the idea of working with the potential of life, and I'm going to be talking about that word potential a lot, is the being and becoming state that we need to hold to allow for the system to catch up to whatever we've learned and for us to keep catching up. In other words, this requires us to change ourselves. This is not about us fixing what's out there. We cannot participate in evolution unless we're evolving ourselves. That's another premise. So with the qualifications of building will, working with love, and working with not developing, meaning in terms of developing evolutionary potential of the systems that we're working with, requires us to develop evolutionary potential inside of ourselves. And what's beautiful about it is all that can happen at the same time. We work with, I in particular work with real estate and infrastructure projects. That's a very strange acupuncture point to heal the earth, right? It's people, I think, have a hard time getting their head around that we could do anything more than just limit the damage with our built environment.
And I'll tell you, I don't hear the words will, love, potential, and developing ourselves very often in connection with real estate development or in connection with the corporate strategy land that I tend to play in. But you do. So let's get grounded here. Tell us what actually happens in a project. Pick a project.
All right, I'm going to give you my standard small example because it's so pithy. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I can get this slideshow up here. And let me see if I can go to presentation mode. I don't know if that'll work. How's that? Is that working? Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna introduce this in my kind of standard way. I think it would be useful. So this diagram many people are familiar with. Can you see my cursor floating around?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're at conventional design. Randy Croxton said, we build our buildings one step better than breaking the law. So LEED comes along, or we decided in the Green Screen Building Council we needed an indicator of how much better we can make buildings. In other words, how much less worse can we make buildings? So slowing down the damage. And this is where LEED comes from. We come along with the idea that maybe this is 70% better energy savings and carbon reduction compared to conventional construction. And then we imply that sustainability must mean zero. And of course, zero doesn't really exist in nature. Until we are reaching this impossible point of zero, we are degenerating the planet. So we're slowing down the damage. I think Bill McDonough talked about, sustainability is a slower way to die. So that's not a very motivating position to come from. And no wonder we have not gotten much traction in the environmental building movement, the green building movement, because all we're really guaranteeing people is that you're going to die more slowly. That's the subliminal text. Well, then what are we going to do? That's not very motivating. What would be motivating? Well, what are we working with? Let's go to first premises. We're working with life. So how can we restore life? And restoration processes are vital. And then how do we work regeneratively? And I'm being very specific about how I'm using these two words. And I'm going to wave the flag for precision right now, because just like the word sustainability has been banalized, the word regeneration is now almost 100% banalized. We're using regeneration as a synonym for restoration. There's a really important difference. Restoration means that we are restoring, sorry, I'm going to geek out here on a little geeky definition. Yeah. Want me to geek, Gil?
Please geek. We're here to geek.
Okay. So restoration means that we are restoring an ecological subsystem, like a wetland, a beach dune system, a forest system, a riparian corridor. We are restoring an ecological subsystem so that it has the self-organizing capability to evolve. That's what restoration means. We're not restoring to an original condition because there is no original condition because of evolution. Life is ongoing. There's no such thing as static life. Life is always moving, always adapting, always perturbating. Regeneration.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on, Bill.
I was just going to ask you exactly where you're going. How do you contrast regeneration?
Okay, that's where I'm going. So regeneration is about a continual process of rebirthing understanding. Now, a simple analogy would be a marriage or a partnership. You have an argument, you have a spat. What do? You're not going to restore that relationship. That relationship already has moved on because of that argument. But what you're going to do is regenerate it, and hopefully into even something better, because working through difficulties actually can be a source of creativity, right? So regeneration is a matter of participating in birth, life, death, rebirth cycles. And let's take it at the pace of a year. That every year, New Year's is really an important thing, is that we should be rebirthing our relationship with the places we live. How are we doing? Where did we fail? What perturbations came into the system, whether it's a hurricane or a wildfire, an earthquake? How do we adapt into the future? So regeneration is a continual process of rebirthing a value-adding relationship with life. Now, how we work with a value-adding relationship gets into a much deeper metaphysical construct, and we'll get there. But ultimately, at the simplest terms, let's move up to Carol Sanford's 4 modern paradigms to actually help explain this graphic. So at the lowest level is extract value. We rip ore from the earth, nutrients from the soil, spirit from employees in bad companies. That's just an abusive way of living. And that's pretty much our paradigm. Then we get it to slow down the damage. This is where LEED comes in, and Green Star and GREAM, and even Living Building Challenge is about slowing down the damage. Doing good jumps us. And doing good sounds really good, except doing good can actually be terrible if we impose our idealized version of the world on a system that doesn't ask for it. So think about the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund in Africa or the Southern Hemisphere, where we impose North American and European ideals of good. And we know how well that's worked out. So doing good at its worst can be a form of colonialism. I know that may sound shocking, but it's true. Doing good, if imposed, doing good at its best is good. But so what does positive mean? What does good mean? Well, positive rain in Santa Fe, New Mexico is different than positive rain in Boston. So doing good is always context dependent. It's not generic. So if doing good is problematic, then let's go to the next one, because I think this helps frame it. This is about evolving inherent potential. Every living entity has its innate essence or intrinsic nature. Uniqueness. I don't know how many of you read Philip Goff's book, Galileo's Error. He talks about Galileo being very conscious of not being conscious of consciousness, because you can't do it. You can't evaluate yourself. So what Galileo did is he determined that all we could do in science is evaluate relationships between entities, not the nature of entities themselves. And so we have speed, mass, distance, velocity, whatever. And that's our physics and chemistry are all based on the relationships between entities and atoms and molecules, not the nature of the entity itself. So what does it mean to understand the essence of an entity? Let's go to the next slide here. Probably I can adapt, move this. That's not what I want. So here's doing good. Promoting culturally idealized versions of what is perceived to be good. Sometimes that works out. But now let's look at evolving inherent potential, whether with people or life sheds. That's a Carol Sanford term, which I like much better than watersheds. Whether with people or life sheds, every living entity asks that we approach it individually to reveal and support its unique potential, just like we do with our children. All right, so what does that mean? Life runs up. We work with potential, not problems. I want to come back to this idea of problem solving. Regeneration does not do problem solving, because problem solving doesn't work. Let me see if I can actually skip it. I'll come to that. I'll come back to that. There's a definition of regeneration. It gives new life or energy to something that has been depleted of its physical vitality or of its meaning. And this is the opportunity Take that marriage example. Our marriage is floundering. How do we regenerate? Our landscape is floundering. How do we regenerate? And do we regenerate it once? No, because life keeps evolving. We have to keep coming back and participating with it. That's the point about regeneration. Gil, does that make sense as a distinction?
It makes sense to me. And, as you pointed out, definitions and buzzwords are inherently problematic. I mean, the word is cool, and then it gets adopted into general use and diluted in general use. We move forward and backward. Regenerative is the new term to replace sustainability, which was replacing corporate social responsibility. But there was sustainability 15, 20 years before corporate social responsibility, and there was regenerative 10 or 20 years before that. So we move back and forth on these terms. Some people use them with great rigor and penetrating impact, like you are doing. And there's the way it gets adopted into the general conversation. And I think that's kind of the nature of humans. We do that, and we'll probably always do that. So clarifying what you mean by it, not just the word, but here's what I mean, here's what it is in practice, here's how it's different, is very powerful. And I'm hoping at some point you'll give us, some on the ground examples of how that's played out.
Right now. So inherent potential. The little girl wants to be an airplane pilot, more than likely, right?
Yeah.
Sebastião Salgado's farm in Brazil, just happened to see one of his films and picked up on this, doing some research. His family farm was completely destroyed and desiccated. 10 years later, it looks like this. Nature wants to recover herself if we actually work with her. John Lew's famous example from his film in the Los Plateaux, an area the size of France. 30 years they tried to work on this. They couldn't figure it out. Finally, they asked the farmers. And within 18 months, began to work. Obviously, after COVID, there's the Venetian canals. You can see the bottom. If you've ever been to Venice, you can't. The air in Beijing, 2 months after COVID. The stream in Baltimore, Maryland. This is 3 years later, once the cement was removed, and we started mimicking the way water wanted to work on the sites to the north of here. But it's very fast. And so our practice believes that places are living organisms, and that the largest manageable system are the places we live. Beyond that, we really can't manage. It becomes abstract. So wherever you're working in the world, these places are alive and they're unique. And it's up to us to understand that uniqueness. And what we do is when we work with communities, I'm going to give you an example right now, we actually help them understand that uniqueness. And the unfolding of what makes this place unique is when people start actually, like I said, falling in love with life again. Understanding is the beginning of love. And so, and by the way, the process also brings people together to start respecting each other. So it's really a compelling process.
So say more about that, Bill, if you will. I mean, falling in love with the place is one thing. Falling in love with people who you hate.
Yeah.
Another, and it happens, but it's a mysterious process. Hey, tell us more about that piece of the work.
I'm gonna hold that. I'm gonna hold that to the next example, because I want to talk about something we call, but I don't call, but in the world is called the law of three.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you know what? I'm going to go there right now. Let me just come through here. Sorry, hope nobody's going to get a seizure out of this. All right, this is important.
Yeah.
In fact, if you come away from this, whatever we're calling this session today,
we call it a conversation.
So if you come away with anything, come away with this framework, because it's the most powerful framework that we are not paying attention to in the world. If we did, our politics would be much different. All life can be seen as an activating force and a restraining or a receiving force. I want to build a building. That's my activating force. What are the restraints? Well, there's budget, there's program, there's NIMBYism, there's gravity, there's rain. All of those forces cause us to then figure out a way to get what I want and also to avoid those problems. And typically, we compromise around that. We give up a little here to get a little there. In politics, Democrats, Republicans, we think that compromise is the height of political sophistication, because if my ego gets beaten up and your ego gets beaten up, then we both feel equally abused, and we kind of appreciate that. It's kind of a nice thing, actually. and we accept a compromised situation. But 3 years later, somebody's either right or wrong. And then we say, why did we give up on that? Nature, however, does not compromise. It harmonizes, it reconciles around future states, always looking forward to potential. Nature does not, if you can anthropomorphize nature, she is not saying, looking over her shoulder and saying, damn, why did that hurricane come through? I really wasn't planning on that. I'm going to go be depressed for a couple of years. So that's not the way nature works. Nature says, got to get to work. Pioneering species, start climbing up the slopes. Early succession species, mid-level succession species. So the self-organization happens immediately, always looking forward. And it's, from a meditation standpoint, yes, we only have the presence, but we never have the past. All we have is the potential is the present moment and the potential for the future. So nature doesn't have problems, it has potential. We have problems. We work it the wrong way. All right, let me go back now to this. Give me an example about how this works. So we were invited years ago to work on the LEED gold rating system for the Brattleboro Food Co-op. And I asked them, do you want LEED or do you want sustainability? And the answer was, we want both, which was a great answer, actually. So, because LEED isn't sustainable, I hope you know that. LEED is an indicator of a green building, not sustainability. So we looked at the nature of the essence of Brattleboro, Vermont. There are not many towns in the world that have a parade called the March of the Heifers. The slow food movement in the United States began here. It is a working landscape town. It's a foodie town, and that became very apparent. So we were hired to do a grocery store. Food is at the core of a localization movement, and I did 5 minutes of research. I'm not sure if I did the research. Maybe David Jaber is on here. He might have done the research. Anyway, the average bite of food in the United States travels 3,600 miles. Used to travel maybe 15 or 20 miles before the Industrial Revolution. So our approach to the executive committee on the co-op was, what happens if there's a truckers' strike? They said, well, we're out of business in 3 days. What happens if Whole Foods moves into town? Oh, we're probably out of business in a year. So you're not a sustainable grocery store if you can't address those things, no matter what we do with the refrigeration cases and light bulbs and low toxicant paints. So we did a tour of the grocery store at our first meeting, and the first bin that we came to was the apple bin, and the apples were from New Zealand. So there's 12,000 miles right there. Blueberries from Chile, strawberries from California. So the carbon footprint was massive, and what we decided to do is say, well, how can we bring this footprint back home? So immediately we are no longer working on the building, we're working on the building system. And what's important to understand is this is the acupuncture point, why real estate is an acupuncture point. The project is an entry point to work with the system that we're part of. And when community members are complaining about a project, as many do about a development project, you say, let's step back. Is it a development project we don't want, or is it because we are really unhappy with our community? And it generally is because they're unhappy with their community, and they're thinking fighting against a development is going to stop that or change that. So this became the challenge for this project, is that we said, well, let's look at the farming in the area. Can we bring back farms? Well, all these green splotches, dark and light green splotches, are abandoned farms. Out of all 50 farms in the area 30 years ago, there's only 2 left. The soil's depleted and desiccated and depleted of nutrients. The watershed is polluted. The best soil was in downtown Brattleboro. Where did most towns feed themselves in World War II? Victory gardens. So this grocery store was programmed to become an agricultural and soil extension service to teach people how to grow their own food again, a cannery where they could can their food, an abattoir for hunters to dress their meat because it's a hunting area, a daycare center, a credit union to begin to start setting up a fund to loan money to reestablish farms, and a Forest Service extension to begin to work with the restoration of the health of this ecosystem and the soils in this ecosystem. Oh, and by the way, a grocery store. The co-op was the executive committee was so excited about this, they rushed us to present that night. My colleague was not very happy. He's not good in front of people. And they now like to call that the double train wreck meeting. And we presented these ideas. We told them, this is a tell. We told them what we were thinking, and one of the board members says, "What the hell is this? All we wanted is a grocery store." And we were fired that night. So justifiably, because what we had not integrated, while we thought we were being a consultant and we were telling them what we had learned, instead of working with the community and developing their collaborative understanding of what was going on. And since that time, we've always done that. It makes a heck of a big difference. So now we wrote a report. We felt we had to give them something. So we wrote about a 60-page report, kind of we threw it at them and ran away. And about a year later, we got a call, almost a year to the date, from the board president. He said, "Bill, we want to apologize to you. This is the best thing that's ever happened to us. We've developed a 100-year ends policy to incorporate this thinking. And we now have a plan to work forward." Now that's the beginning of a regenerative project. Not only that, is that because of the nature of this work, it began to spread through New England in terms of what this co-op was doing. And so here we are in Brattleboro, and basically we were working in this larger nested system. We'll talk about this in a minute, why this is important. But here's Brattleboro, and there's a larger system that we call the greater whole in our practice of New England. And the co-op system in New England is pretty tight. So Brattleboro Food Co-op was getting calls from other co-ops saying, "What are you guys doing? We want to do that too." That's the way this work works. If it's done where we're building the capacity of the people in the community to start understanding how to be in relationship with the system of life, that is contagious, and it spreads. And so it's like a pebble dropped in a pond. It ripples out, and that's the power of building this practice. Because regeneration is not a deliverable; it's a deliverable of a practice. We're actually engaging people in a community to actually work on the co-evolutionary relationship of life and each other. All right, I'm going to stop there for a second. Gil and your interlocutor, do you want any questions?
I've got a ton of them, but I think it's a good time to open up to the questions in the room. You've made a lot of provocative statements here. You've planted some extremely rich seeds. I'm not going to repeat them all and drill in on them. I'd like to hear what is this provoking for you all? Please use the Zoom raise hands function at the bottom of your screen so we can queue you up in order, and we'll take you in order.
And Bill, if you'll stop sharing your screen, it'll be easier for us to call on people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Bill, thank you for that. That was just what I was hoping you were going to do. Yeah. And just one thing on the last thing you said. People say, "Well, we want to do that too." And as far as theories of change goes, that's right at the heart of it for me. Is letting people see something that feels different and have them say, "I want that. We want that too," is so different than saying, "Here's a whole list of problems you should be pissed off about," which is going to motivate change and creativity better. It's pretty clear.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Shell, and then Marilyn, and then Jan.
Yeah.
And let me just ask you all, we've got a lot of people here today, so please try to keep your comments focused and efficient. Thanks. Shell.
I live about 45 minutes from Brattleboro Food Co-op. I actually passed through there the other day on my way back from the eclipse viewing. And it really has spread. I'm a member of River Valley Co-op in Northampton and East Hampton, somewhat south of Brattleboro. And they have a very green building in both of their locations. They have a lot of things I think that maybe they learned from Brattleboro, or Brattleboro learned from them. There's also an entity called the Co-op Development Institute based around here that supports co-ops around the country. So the idea of pumping out best practices to make them available is something very, very much a part of the culture here. There's also an amazing group called CISA, Community Involved in Supporting Agriculture, which has built a market for local foods that was astoundingly successful. I saw it coming much slower than it did. It's very exciting. And I think you go into a mainstream supermarket here, you're going to see local foods prominently displayed because people here have been trained to go to farmers markets, to find the local stuff in their supermarkets. And even if they're not looking at food miles from a carbon point of view, they understand that they're getting better food and they're supporting their local farmers by buying local.
Shell, do you have a question though in that?
Well, how do we pollinate this outside of Western New England?
Well, it's happening. It's slow, but it's you know what? That really brings up an interesting question. We may want to table this for a second, but the idea of speed is always I'm always approached about, well, how can we do this faster? And how can we scale this? I always hear the word scaling. And let me just give a little teaser, maybe we can come back to it, is that scaling is a mechanical world metaphor. It's okay, it's part of our lives. We live in a mechanical world, but in our practice, we'd much rather talk about field building. Building an energy field. And that's really what was happening here. That's the example here, because fields are instantaneous. And what we have found is that if we build a core group of people in a community who are actually getting something done effectively, purposefully, in a practiced way, it attracts naysayers as opposed to and it becomes logarithmic. I'd like to believe that. I haven't seen that logarithmic evidence, but I've seen certainly mathematical doubling and tripling of people involved very quickly. So I have hope that this will spread like wildfire when it takes hold. I'm going to say one more thing. I have a conceit. There's 4,037 cities in the world larger than 100,000 people. Let's take we get 3.5% tipping point. You can argue what percentage in marketing is required to get a tipping point, but I like 3.5%. Because what I hear more from more people than not. 3.5% is 141 cities. If we get this done in 141 cities, we will save the planet. So anyway, that's a conceit, but I like that conceit. All right, I'll stop.
Marilyn, let me ask a question before I call on you, if that's okay with you. Bill, what help do you and your posse need for that to happen?
Say that again, Gil?
What kind of help do you and your regenerative posse need to get to that 141 cities or to get that tipping point happen? What's missing for you?
We need to, I'll be a little negative. We need to get people to stop thinking they can fix the world. And we need to get people to start fixing themselves.
I just had an interesting encounter with the word fixing this week. We usually think of it in the sense of repairing, but as an old photographer from the chemical days, fixing was locking the image into place so that it wouldn't ever change again. Mm-hmm. So fixing becomes a problematic word. So you just answered talking about the problem. Answer the same question, please, from the perspective of potential.
The potential is that I am seeing so many more people, I think mostly because of fear, stepping up and saying, what else can we do? And the subtext to that is, who do we need to be? Mm-hmm. So I'll let it go with that. It's a practice.
And I'll come back to it later on. Marilyn, and then thank you, Bill.
Thank you so much, Bill and Gail, of course. Thank you. So you've talked about coming from love, and I so appreciate your work. So quick question. Do you know about the work happening in Petaluma, California? Cool Petaluma?
I have heard hints of it, but no, I don't, Marilyn.
I think that would be a good connection to make, and I can help you make that if you would like.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing is a deep shift in mindsets. Like, how do you come to a place where you can think and live and make choices that you are doing? And this may be too long a question, but I would love at some point to hear about your own learning history. Like, how do you get to this place? Because it just doesn't just happen.
It doesn't. I'll answer that question in a shorthand. I was the work that Regenesis was doing was very interesting to me. They had formed in 1995. I ran across them or 94. I ran across them in 95. Said, this is really interesting stuff. They're integrating at a deeper level than I've ever anticipated, ever thought about. What they were integrating is human development and ecological development, putting it together as a whole, because it was still two pieces, ecological, human. How does this whole work as a whole living system? Because everything's connected. And then we spent 10 years working on trying to figure out, how do you practice this? How do you actually make this practicable? It also took me, coincidentally, 10 years to learn that it was about me.
Are you writing about this? What that means for it to take 10 years to learn that it's about me, and what that means it's about me?
I'm a slow learner, Marilyn. So what it took me, because I was trying to fix the world. And
there's a famous story told in the Jewish wisdom tradition about a young rabbi who set out to fix the world. And he found he couldn't fix the world, so he decided to fix his county, and that didn't work. So he decided to fix his town, and that didn't work. So he decided to fix his family, particularly his wife, and that didn't work. So now, his very famous rabbi in our tradition, the Chofetz Chaim, says that he focuses on fixing himself, and then he says, and in so doing, he changes the world.
That's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. And so, but here's the thing. It's not, where you start doesn't matter. My motivation was wanting to fix the world, and that comes back in. So you can start anywhere in a whole system. In our practice, we call this 3 lines of work: self, group, system. I can't do much as myself, right? I mean, it takes a team, it takes a community, it takes a village kind of thing. But if I'm a jerk, and I've certainly been known to be a jerk, I'm not going to be very effective in a group. So I have to therefore be reflective. And we teach this directly to the communities we work with. If you're a jerk, this isn't going to work out. You figure out how to fix yourself. It's not our job to fix you. But then what gives the group meaning is the potential of the system, working on the system itself. And so self, group, system is a whole. And it's a very important part of this practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Ballard, welcome.
You're muted, John. John, you're muted. Still muted.
Let's go on to Stuart while you figure that out. Yeah, oh, there you go.
I figured it out. Sorry. Bill, good to see you again. And just want to say that I'm 100% finding my experience mirrored in what you're saying. I wanted to ask you if you've run into Jordan Nicholas Sukkot and the Lionsburg wiki, lionsburg.org wiki. He's thinking along similar lines. He just came to the Bay Area for a week we did a charrette on regenerative systems, and then we had the Funding the Commons and Earth Commons weekends here in Berkeley. And I've been learning what you are doing. I want to just push back a little bit that I think there are 3,900 counties in the United States. And I think the counties are fairly well mapping onto the bioregions. And so it seems to me that what you were doing there, yes, the focus is on the city, and that's the place people can identify with, but it seems like we need to include the county as well. I'll just give my example. I did 110 focus groups with 90-minute focus groups using the technology of participation from 89 to 92 in Santa Barbara County. And we launched a school of collaborative leadership that went 32 years until COVID. And the beauty of it is that the course was designed so each participant had to learn facilitation skills and then put the course on for one another.
Beautiful.
So we now have almost 1,000 graduates in Santa Barbara County. And the beautiful thing is that that the model of asking the leaders what should we do before training ourselves in the leadership seems to work well, given that the participants in the courses since I left after year 3 have put on an additional 400 focus groups in the community asking about the leadership needs and regeneration, sustainability. We're very much at the core of that back then. So it seems to me it's kind of a both and, where the cities are in context of the county, and if you don't have the county system mapped, then the stuff in the city might be harder to pull off.
Yeah, I agree. I actually am 100% in agreement that it's a nested system relationship. You have the inner whole, you have what we call the proximate or the nearby whole, which is, if you will, the bioregion, and the greater whole, which could be any kind of endeavor. In that Brattleboro Co-op example, you had the grocery store, you
Right.
had the watershed of Brattleboro, and
Yep.
then you had cooperatives, and all of those are necessary. I had a little bit of a problem with the flippancy of talking about we're going to work in bioregions. You can't work in bioregions without place, and places can't work without bioregions.
Right.
So it's a situation. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for everything you're doing. Keep it up, buddy.
Here in the Bay Area, we have about 110 cities in 9 counties in one region have certain ecological characteristics that are common and others that are different. Some things can only be addressed at regional scale. Some things can be driven by city innovation, Berkeley, Oakland, Petaluma, Palo Alto, and others who do something that other folks say, we want that too. And then it ripples up and down through those nested systems.
So what you're raising, Gil, is really important. There is no generic answer to this work. There are principles that need to be followed, and then, even the term best practices is problematic. We like to play with that. There's only better practices. There's no such thing as best.
Yep.
Okay. You want to call on somebody else, Gil?
Yes, Lee. There you go. And then Jane, and then George.
Great, Bill. Thank you. Thank you very much. You evoked a few concepts that I think are just critical. The notion of regeneration and nature, and you evoked Meg Wheatley's work, Leadership in the New Science. I won't talk about where Meg has gone since then. My dear friend Alan Briskin is working on what I think is a very important book about fields. And you opened with this notion of human intention. In my noodling, the critical aspect of all of this is the human element, and how can we get people to shift. And you said you'd come back to it, I think. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit, as much as you can, as much knowledge as you have, about the notion of shifting the human intention. Anything else aside from people being in the field that creates that movement, which might be enough. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Literally a half an hour ago, I just got off the phone with an old client of mine from Viña del Mar, Chile, just doing a debrief. It's almost a 10-year-old client, but anyway, we keep up. And so that's fresh in my mind. I would love to share that Chilean case study because it's still working, and that's even better. That would answer that. I think it would help answer that question, Stuart. So hopefully we have time to do that, Gil.
Beautiful. One more last thing that you didn't talk about: the forces pushing back against, which I think is kind of a critical piece of the whole equation. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about that, or
I've learned to ignore them. They don't matter.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
They do matter, of course, and I think it's important to listen to those forces because you can learn from them. But this is the being state that I was talking about. It used to matter to me, and I used to really be depressed about it.
Sure.
And it doesn't help anybody. So now it's just a matter of being in repose about and accepting that's where people are, loving them anyway, and despite that, or being less frustrated with them. it, I'll tell you, it's what I've learned, and this is self-aggrandizing, I admit, but this is ultimately a spiritual practice, Stuart. This is not, it's metaphysical.
Amen.
It comes down, the question I used to ask myself was, where do we stop integrating? Because I was integrating building systems and then ecological systems and then regional systems, and where do you stop integrating? And it comes right back down to the universe. So we're
Thank you.
trying to figure that out. And so carrying that spirit, I've been told by more than a few clients recently, in the face of adversity, because not all of our clients are happy to have me here, but just appreciating them and being calm and collected and not defensive. That's what allowed the tide to be turned. I was told that. Said, because you held yourself that way, I'm willing to pay attention. Something's important here. So this kind of spiritual practice, I think, or whatever you want to call it, consciousness practice or being state practice, I don't care. Call it Fred. But sorry, Fred, who's around. But anyway, pick a name. Is that that's the groundwork. Katia Laszlo said, sustainability is an inside job. I love that quote.
Yeah, it's all about doing the work, I think, without attachment to outcome and just doing it as a spiritual practice, because that's what your interiority says that you have to do. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And in a very practical, kind of large system political sense to it, like what your question is hinting at, those other people, who don't share the story. From what Bill is saying and from my own experience, living well and being an example for other people, doing projects that people say, I want to have that, building, growing that potential into reality, that either builds enough of a mass of people that can move political systems, or just maybe it starts to win over some of the opponents who say, I want that too.
Yep.
And Bill, you've seen that happen, I know, in a bunch of cases. Justin,
Bill, I just want to jump in real quick, if I can.
And then we'll go to Jane and then Justin. I think you got flipped here, but Jane's up next. Go ahead, Ken.
I really appreciate, Bill, that this is a spiritual practice and a spiritual transformation. I was talking to my good buddy Gene Dunaway, who's on this call this week. I said, I've got 37 years of mindfulness practice. So if I don't have something for it at this point, I need to go back and start again. But there's two things that I can think of, teachers of mine. One was Sabanfu Sameh, who was married to Malidoma Sameh, and the other is Joanna Macy. And in Sabanfu's case, she was in Burkina Faso, brought a bunch of women from Germany, and they just were talking and talking and talking. They were not connected. And she said, come down to the river. They brought all these women down to the river. They covered them in mud, and they said, just listen to the river. And after that, they had a connection to the earth, and it completely changed the way they began to interact for the rest of the week that they were there. Getting that connection to the earth is key. The second was Joanna Macy's work. She's done stuff where I've been in groups of 100 people where she'll lead an exercise that completely transforms your relationship to the people there and to the land. This is a dimension that does not get trained on Zoom. It just doesn't happen. So we need to bring these dimensions in, and it ties back to an earlier call we had on Santa Pensar con la Tierra, and I hope I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly, of thinking with the heart, feeling with the mind, and doing that in conjunction with the earth.
Right. Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Jane, Justin, George, and Victoria, or Jonathan, I don't know which. And then Bill, we want to invite you to do the exercise you talked about earlier.
Or the story, maybe it's better, maybe the story. So I should tell you.
Okay, either whatever you want, wherever you want to go with it. Jane Bird, you're up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I would sure love to be your understudy, Bill. This work is just what organizes my heart in this lifetime. I'm wondering, that must have been a hell of a report that you left with the Brattleboro Food Co-op and then ran away from for a year. What do you suppose was going on in that community of those people with that report in your absence?
The report doesn't do it. It's the energy that we had there with them that allowed them to reference it from the report. report wasn't that, I wouldn't call the report that good. It was interesting. It had some insights. It takes what I've been told at the pace. I think it's like 52 days we can rewire the myelination of our neurons or something like that if you really practice hard. At the pace of community development, it takes about a year to actually begin to realize something funny is going on. I've been fired 7 times with clients, some major clients who've fired us, and every one of them have hired us back within a year. That's I love that statistic.
That's the kind of business model.
It's not a great business model, but
No, it might be. It might be.
But it shows you that it takes time to process. I had one client say, "Reed, my minister doesn't get away with saying the shit you say. You're fired." And then a year later, we were doing multiple projects with him. A Kundalini yoga master told me, "Oh yeah, we said the same thing in Kundalini yoga. It's a year to change and 3 years to change permanently." So, for whatever that's worth.
Thank you. Justin, thanks for waiting. You're up.
So I don't know if this approach can help accelerate anything, but there's a famous saying that goes, not just showing up at the right place and the right time, but also in the right way. And so there's an example I wanted to give of, you mentioned Chile, that there's a group called Full Spectrum Capital Partners in Oakland that one of their partners actually went to the Mapuche people who had their own independent social system that was never taken over by the Spaniards. And so he, in order to have his heart prepared, actually ended up several years before meeting somebody who was from that tribe here in the United States. And it kind of worked on his psyche a little bit before he was prepared to humble himself to start listening to their social structure and how they were harmonizing with the land around them rather than trying to exploit it. But part of that showing up in the right way is the listening aspect and observing aspect. And so Bucky Fuller uses the comprehensive anticipatory design science. Well, that takes listening to the voice and what it's trying to tell you of the system that you were talking about. And to be humble enough to not say, oh, I'm the only one who could possibly hear that voice, or I must be hearing it 100% clear and nobody else can. And so, getting together in ways that we listen to each other is really important in that too. So besides co-ops, I wanted to mention a group called the Democracy Collaborative that has been working with folks on the concept of, well, what do we produce and goes out of our community, and then what comes back? And so what are the things that are recirculating? What are the things that are reproducing? And that's, I think, is a wise way to start building out that 100-year ends, not just the immediate means to do things. And so I was wondering on 2 practices. Have you heard of a group called Whiskey Hill Farms in the space of permaculture and the things that plants give to each other and take from each other, and on the earth and that kind of thing? And then also in you mentioned earlier about renewable energy systems. Where do you look for finding the latest in shrinking the means and momentum of production to make it more so that we can also be reducing our footprint as we are doing the lifestyles that we want to recirculate?
Well, the quick answer to that is I'm not smart enough to hold all those things. So this is why I work with a lot of other people, and I don't even bother trying to keep up with technology. There's so many people that are doing a much better job. So I ask, that's all. I just talk to people. I'm a collaborative learner. And so the fun of this work is just embracing so many other people out there. It's mind-boggling what is going on. And I love this. By the way, that's really important. There's not one right way, right? We're all the premise that we hold is that we're all filling a unique ecological niches. Our unique essence is meant to be applied in, if you will, from who you really are, not being told by somebody else. And this work, ultimately, regeneration from our school of thinking is about essence to essence relationship, meaning the essence of a place, the essence of an organization, your essence, your kid's essence. You know, if you have children, every child is different. And you want to fan the flame of that potential, which is why we started out with this idea of potential, is that by honoring the essence of every individual allows their potential to blossom. That's where we release incredible amounts of energy. And that's what this work is ultimately about. It's pretty simple. Essence to essence relationship. We can go home now, folks, if you can. No, I'm serious.
We can go home, but we got a few more people in the queue, Bill, so stick around.
Okay, well,
Dustin, thank you. George, please.
Yeah, I've been spending the last 2 weeks with Ray Anderson's 2011 book, Business Lessons from a Radical Industrialist. In the summer of 1994, he decided that he was going to take Interface Incorporated, one of the largest carpet companies in the world, to zero emissions by 2020. They made it in 2019. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see it. And what is interesting to me is that from the 2011 book, even at that point, there was such great success. They have a consulting company that helps other corporations do the same thing, but I don't see that model being replicated, and I want to know why. And I'm going to ask you about that, Gil, at some point. And so I'm wondering about, here you have this magnificent industrial model that works by all of the capitalistic measurements, and it doesn't seem to have been replicated.
yep. And Gil, you and I were actually, remember Robert Shad?
I totally do.
Remember his comment about Ray?
Helping.
Well, that's, we find all sorts of excuses not to do things, George.
George, we find a lot of companies, a lot of really successful, experienced, brilliant executives who still say, like, after 30 years of this evidence, we can't afford to do it. So, and we could spend a lot of time on why has it happened. I would say two things. One is that a lot more is happening than you would be aware of. A lot of it just doesn't surface, but there's an enormous amount of creativity in every domain that people here on this call are concerned with. Thrilling, mind-blowing every day, and yet not enough, not fast enough, not scaled enough, but all happening. And the other thing is what Bill was saying about potential. We could spend a lot of time thinking about why aren't they doing X, or we can do it and show it and grow it. George, thank you.
Here's the other thing. Here's the other thing that people say. So people say, "Well, I want that." I show developers that we save money on every project, and we save time to market. We save capital costs doing deep green buildings, and operating costs. All sounds like a great financial win. And then they say, "Well, tell me how you're going to do it on my project." Well, I can't, because it's emergent.
Yeah.
And that's when you lose people, because our culture wants predictability. Guess what? You can't. No one's in charge. You're not in control. And yet we think we are. That's the fucking rub, is that we think we're in charge.
No.
And,
and look, the other thing about this, George, is, Bill and Regenesis and me and Natural Logic and other folks on this call here who do this work only have so much capacity. We don't need to work with everybody. We need to work with the people who are ready to work with us. Not with the people who aren't. They can go off by themselves or find other consultants or coaches to work with. We're ready to work with the folks who are ready to move. And that takes the kind of approach that Bill is talking about. George, thanks. I'm going to move on to...
Just one last thing. In a number of calls that I've been on recently, people are talking about the lack of connection. And I think this might be something. The companies, the people, the groups that are doing this stuff are not necessarily connected to each other. And when we do that, perhaps that will
But again, I'm going to push back on you. There's a lot of connecting going on. Not everybody's connected to everybody, but I hear a lot from people saying, why isn't X happening? And I look around me and I see it happening all over the place. So I invite you to shift your scan, and we can talk more offline about this. Bill, we've got 5 more hands up. We've got 19 minutes left on the call. How would you like to move?
Oh, well, if we can be really quick with questions, we can take them, and then let's cut it off right here, and then we can end with a story.
Yeah, and I'll ask people then make it a question, not a presentation, so we can get everybody in.
No pronunciations, please.
Okay.
So, hi, Bill. Great to see you.
Good to see.
And I hope you're going to mention the regenerative practitioner course. But my question is, because
Thank you. I wasn't. I forget to, but
Victoria, can you put it in the chat when you get a chance?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
We talked about the nested holes, and someone mentioned the town and then the county, and we talked about bioregionalism in this conversation. And we're working with Joe Brewer on bioregionalism, and I would love to hear what you have to say about a county being a nested whole versus the bioregion from the natural boundaries.
well, okay. Quick answer on that, Victoria, is that probably the county. If the county is what people call here, then it's probably small enough. But the question that Helena Newton Harrison used to ask, the ecological artist from San Francisco, how big is here? And people are very good at knowing where there is and where here is. So check that. If it's meaningful, if it's an identifiable whole for them, then it might be an inner whole. Yeah, I'm concerned about actually Joe's work, because you can't just talk about this. You have to talk about it's places that get activated, then the bioregion. The bioregion gives you identity, and then what are we serving? What's the larger whole? That's a longer conversation. But I'm glad bioregionalism is out there, but it needs to be contextualized with places. Places are the energy centers that allow the bioregional system to work. In my not so humble
Maybe
opinion.
we haven't talked about him lately, but we're definitely doing that. Places
Good.
First. So
Great. That's great to hear. Good to see
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, and please put Victoria, would you put TRP in the chat? The TRP ref. Thank you.
Yeah, and everybody, if you have resources, share them up in the chat. We don't send the chat out, so if you want to save the chat reminder, use the 3 dots at the top or bottom of your chat window to grab it for yourselves. Emily, welcome. You're up.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Bill. I think this is a beautiful synthesis of a lot of stuff. And like Gil, I work in the corporate space, and I've honed in on leadership development as the thing, right? Developing this complexity mindset at the individual level. And my question for you is around, and I hate to do this, but I also feel that it's my responsibility. In a place-based group and context, you obviously can't control for the diversity, but you can control for it in the teams that you bring into your work and your practice. And I've increasingly found myself in less and less diverse spaces around environmental and sustainable and regenerative places, which has been very interesting for me. So curious your thoughts on diversifying the people who are professing to help create what's emerging.
Yeah, well, it's a tough question. We have tried to force the issue and found that was not helpful. Meaning we were very conscious and concerned and invited and went out of our way, and yet wasn't good, wasn't a fit. So I have to say that it's the responsibility of people who want to be diversified to step up, from my perspective. I can't fix that problem. I can speak about it and act in my own way, but in terms of getting people to sign up and attend and join, we've struggled with this for 30 years, Emily. And I have no answer for that other than keep inviting. So not a satisfactory answer, I know, but I'm not satisfied with that either. But we have tried, and anyway, enough defense. I'm not going to be defensive anymore.
That might be a good topic for a future call.
I think so.
Give it enough time to really space.
Hit me up, Gil. Hit me up.
Already on my list, Emily.
Okay.
Alan and then Ron, and then we're going to move to closing, I think. Alan Haber.
Thank you.
And let me ask you both to stay compact, because Bill's got a few more things to say before we roll out of here. Go ahead.
A difficulty I have. This has been a wonderful presentation. I hope in a recording that's available so I can refresh myself. Alan,
let me just say on that, these calls are always recorded. They're always posted on our YouTube archives. We'll send that link out after the call. Probably will be up end of the week or early next week.
Great, thank you. You mentioned Eleanor Ostrom and the governance of the commons, the Nobel Prize in Economics, and her work. I met her and we discussed the relevance of the commons as a form of governing commonly pooled resources in the urban center. And on the basis of that, I've undertaken for 15 years now that campaign in the center of Ann Arbor, doing as best we could to manifest all the good ideas that you put forward. And yet we come across, when we actually touch resources and privilege of the powerful, we come across the war against the commons. And we have been opposed by every power organization in the whole area and fight and fight and fight. And it's an experience, and I'm glad to have hear what you said. But I'm in the midst of a struggle. Though we're doing Earth Stage, we do a lot of good program, and it is growing bit by bit, person by person, and it takes a time, and a turn of heart is basically what it's all about. Anyhow,
keep pursuing. I think many of us in this call have been
say further about Eleanor Ostrom, I think we would all benefit from. She was a wonderful person, so sadly passed.
Yes, indeed. And, I think many of us on this call have been doing this for decades. So congratulations to everybody for it's not easy, persevering. Thank you, Alan.
And Alan, you've been sticking in it for a really long time. I would encourage you and everybody else, in addition to Bill's books, there are a bunch of YouTube videos of him doing presentations. Immerse yourself in them. I've been working with and listening to Bill for, like I said, almost 30 years, and every time I see a new one, my mind is blown. So just, put it on when you're going for a walk or making your dinner, or put it on double speed if you want. Just listen to a lot of Bill and let this stuff sink into you and see what that does for the approaches in Ann Arbor. Alan, thank you. Let me go on to Ron.
Yeah, very, very briefly. One is that we hope that your presentation will be available. Just you showed us a couple of slides. We'd love to see the whole presentation. Secondly, the line from Eleanor Ostrom I still love. She talked about cheap talk. And she said, we dismiss cheap talk, but that's about what the world is. And that's one of the great lines I think she talked about, is people getting together and talking about it. Question I have, I'm in Chicago and we are working on watersheds. You haven't mentioned watersheds. And we're working on this idea that the Great Lakes is a watershed. And so I'd like your reaction to that as ways of getting people's attention back to this idea of place. The last thing I would say, we've been working hard on this idea of scale, scale, scale. And the phrase that we came up with is replicate. You can't make it 10 times or 100 times, but you can replicate it. And that's the work that we've been doing with Presidio Management Education. So thank you.
Good. Well, water is the force of creation, right? Or at least a force of creation, and the watershed is vital. I think Carol's transfer of that, Carol Sanford's term, transferred that term into life shed, which I think is actually more whole. The Great Lakes as a watershed, yes, we could say the United States or the Central Mississippi River is a watershed. It doesn't help us see the whole, however. And so at some point, there's fractal relationships that we need to actually deal with. And the question really is, as I was saying to Victoria and Jonathan, is that we have to ask the question, how big is here? And because that's the scale that Eleanor Ostrom was talking about in terms of being able to receive feedback from the system and offer a reciprocal exchange of dynamic relationships. And anyway, that's my only comment right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And Ron, I'll say one other thing about scale, Ron. As somebody who's living near and has worked in Silicon Valley, the conversation about one of the first questions a VC will ask you is, will it scale? Right?
Right.
And scale means that. It means the hockey stick. It means the rapid ramp up to unicorn or whatever. That's not how things grow in the living world. And so I contrast that vertical scale with horizontal scale, with the spreading and propagation. Horizontal scale is federated small things doing their place and knitting together gradually over time and getting a scale that can be massive, but doesn't feel like it or look like it.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you for the question. Ken, you want to say any words of reflection as we move toward closing here?
I just want to thank Bill for an amazing
I'm going to
talk.
hear about the Chile thing from Bill for a minute before we wrap up.
I think that's pretty important. Could I close with that, Gil?
Yeah, I just was going to say, I just want to thank Bill for an amazing talk and for the richness of the chat. There's been some incredible things there. I'll spend 3 months going through all the links on there, but people's attention, it's just been a privilege. I was thinking, we're coming around Earth Day, and I can't think of a better way to celebrate Earth Day than to have been on this talk today. So thank you, Bill, and I look forward to what you're going to close with.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Go for it. There we are. All right, I'll try to make this quick because we have to finish. So this law of three that I was telling you about, when developers or people see this, they say, wow, if you can harmonize, this one developer said to us, you're worth 15 years worth of lawyers. And I said, well, that's great. What should we do? Well, here we have this project, 19 hectares in Viña del Mar, Chile, of an oil tank farm owned by Copec, the large gasoline and forestry and mining company. And they said, we have 25 activist groups in Viña del Mar who all call us the enemy. And they literally do call them the enemy. And we want to give a gift to the city. And we said, so my first meeting with them, they sent me to the PR, public relations department at Copec, and they had a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, of all 25 activist groups. And then I met with the CEO and I said, real estate is not your core business. Why are you doing this? And he said, well, we want to give a gift to the city. That it doesn't sound to me like you're giving a gift. It sounds to me like you're going to war. And that's exactly what they were doing. They wanted somebody to battle these groups, and that doesn't really work. So we explained how we worked. They said, we don't believe you. We don't understand it, but we'll give you 2 months of consulting time to do what you say, and then we'll evaluate. So, well, are you cool with that? We said, sure. So Viña del Mar, Vineyard by the Sea, is one of the great early garden cities of the world. They borrowed English garden tradition. It used to look like this. Now it looks like, now it looks like this. It's a dead zone in the bay. The estuary, this estuary right along here, is now literally a parking lot. Architecture is destroyed, the habitat's destroyed, and everybody's blaming the developers for it, not the government officials who they elected. But so here's the site. We worked out about 20 to 30 kilometers to understand the dynamics of this place called here. And this estuary is very important. This is the seedbed for the health of Valparaiso Bay. So that's an important feature. We found out that basically this place, every time human activity occurred here, they actually improved the health of the diversity of the ecosystem, which is quite unusual until the Pinochet era, and then things started going downhill, including tourism in a lagging economy. And the reason why this graph is important is that we were graphing what we were hearing from people. And we went back a second time to the community members and said, here's what we're learning. And they said, you're really paying attention. And then we were invited in relationship. We were no longer just a couple of gringos from the States. We were now in relationship with them because we were paying attention. And what we proposed to them is that the developer is not their enemy. The developer could be a collaborator, because the typical developer comes in with a project and says, we will give this neighborhood something. We'll give you a pool. We'll give you a school if you give us permission to build. So it's a transactional relationship. What we were proposing is that we want to all work together, all these different stakeholders, whether it's habitat connectivity or climate change or gender equity or mobility or jobs, whatever, universities, all these different representatives of these different stakeholder groups can be in service to the health of the larger system, that we're all in this together, including the developer. And this is the first time they'd ever thought of that. Most people never think about the developer as wanting quality of life because that protects their investment. So the premise that we worked in with the community is that we are all here in co-creating. And the developer basically sponsored lunch over the space of a year, every 6 weeks. And we gradually got more and more people involved, and they began to share with each other what they were working on and how they were working on it. And what happened is this collaborative field was being built, but it takes time. But after about 10 months, people started saying, wait a minute, I didn't know you were working on that. We're kind of working on that too. Maybe we should collaborate. The Chamber of Commerce executive director, who did not want to talk to us because he said, listen, buddy, we know how things work. We don't need, and again, a couple of gringos telling us this. He called up our client 10 months into the process, and he said, Ricardo, I don't know what you guys are doing, but count us in. This is the first time the city's been able to dream in 30 years. The mayor did not want to talk with us and commanded her staff not to talk with us, the sustainability staff and planning staff. Another year later, she called up and said, I get it. I love it. Count us in. We're part of this. And so what happens is this field starts to grow. And what we're leaving with in this project is, oh, by the way, that executive director of the Chamber of Commerce gave $4 million to begin the restoration of this estuary. Nothing to do with the project. It had everything to do with the health of the city. So I'll leave with this quote from Simone Weil. If you want to save the planet, start at home. Place is a doorway into caring. Love of place unleashes the personal and political will needed to make profound change. It can also unite people across ideological spectra because place is what we all share. It is the common that allows people to call themselves a community. And I will finish with that.
Bill, it's beautiful. Thank you so much on behalf of everybody here. It's been enormously rich enormously rich session full of potential. The phrases that are ringing in me going out are potential and place and person. And that quote from Chile, first time in 30 years we've been able to dream. Yeah. But the question I've been living with lately, I've shared with some of you, is what might it be like if we actually did business and did everything else as though we actually belong to the living world? And you've given us a beautiful window into that. Willing to come back again some future date?
No, of course, always.
I think people would love that. And again, I encourage you, Bill, is there a link for people to go to explore your work? Can you throw that in the chat before we close?
We're so bad about this yet, but I'll put our website in there. What I suggest looking at, we have resources, and I'm happy to send all sorts of papers and videos and all that.
Well, you can give me some links. We'll put them in the follow-up mailings. We'll go out to people.
Yeah, I'll do that.
And Ken, did you have something?
Yeah, Bill just kind of covered this. Have you read any books, Bill? I'm big on building my library. I'd love to read anything you've written. So, but if you're going to send links and videos, that works totally fine as well.
I would encourage you also just go to YouTube and and search for Bill Reed and search for Regenesis and see what you find. There's lots and lots there. It'll keep you busy for a while. Thank you, everybody. Reminder, Living Between Worlds convenes the third Wednesday of every month, 12 noon Pacific time for 90 minutes. We'd love to have you there. You're on the mailing list now, so you'll get reminders. Speaking of diversity, which Emily raised before, invite other people who are not like you and not like us. We're constantly reaching out. We'd love to have more voices, different ages, different backgrounds, different complexions, different life experiences. So help us do that. Thank you for participating. We'll see you next time.
You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye.